Cool. Thank you for everyone joining the webinar. Welcome. Today's webinar is called Checkout or Timeout, Supercharge Your eCommerce Strategy. What we want to talk about here is the latest technology trends in the e-commerce market and the key things that make or break your e-commerce strategy. This is Jenny Tang, the Marketing Programs Manager at Rackspace Asia, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar. Just a housekeeping piece first. This webinar will be recorded and we will make the recording available to you shortly. At the same time, you will be put on mute during the webinar. For questions, please type into the question box and we'll go through them in our Q&A section. Alright, let's get started. To start with, I would like to introduce our two guest speakers. Today we are delighted to have our first speaker, Patrick Deloy, the Executive Director and Founder of Bluecom, which is one of Asia's leading e-commerce solutions provider. Patrick has been involved in IT and e-commerce in Asia for 8 years. He's going to be presenting on the platform for e-commerce and its trends. So Patrick, can you talk a bit about Bluecom?
All right, thanks a lot, Andy, for the introduction, and hello everyone also from my side. So as Andy mentioned, we from Bluecom, we are one of the biggest e-commerce solution providers in East Asia. We are present in 7 locations across the region, as you can see on this slide here. So we tend to work with a lot of international and local companies on their e-commerce strategy, the e-commerce implementation, localization, and support for these markets. So obviously Hong Kong, China, Greater China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia are very important markets for us. We do a lot of implementations, e-commerce implementations, online shop implementations there, and we know the local markets very well. On a technical level, we are a solution partner of Magento, Demandware, and Hybris, and in fact we're going to be the biggest solution partner for most of these solutions that we're working with. So, in total, across all offices, we have a team of about 150 people, and like I mentioned before, we come from a very technical direction, so we focus mostly on the implementation, development and support of e-commerce platforms. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in this presentation about the decision factors that you as an online merchant should ask yourself when you are looking at the decision of which platform you should choose for your e-commerce strategy, and what are the important considerations for your ongoing online business.
Okay, thanks Patrick. So the second speaker is Jean Tang. He's the solution architect at Rackspace Asia. Jean develops tailored solutions for customers in Asia over a range of specialties, including e-commerce. In this webinar, he will mainly talk about the considerations associated with designing and building the infrastructure for e-stores. So Jean, would you give a brief introduction of Rackspace?
Thanks, Jenny. Let's give you a quick introduction of Rackspace. So Rackspace is a managed and hosting and cloud provider. We're infrastructure and hosting specialists, and there's a number of different offerings ranging from public and private cloud to your traditional hosting. Now, our special sauce actually really comes in the form of our support, where we endeavor to give you, the customers, the greatest customer experience. Now, a bit about Rackspace by the numbers. We were established in 1998, so we've been in the industry for a little while now. And over that time, we've grown to a customer base of about 205,000 customers, of which about 40% is in the UK's FTSE 100 and about 60% in the Fortune 100 as well. We have, our customers are actually based over 120 different countries. We also have 10 data centers globally as well. And as Jenny mentioned in today's presentation, my focus is likely going to be around the e-commerce infrastructure for your e-commerce platform.
Okay, thanks, Dean. Both of them have work experience in developing e-commerce solutions for business for all sides. So today they will be sharing some of their thoughts and tips on the market. I believe you're going to get a lot out of this. So first thing we really need to understand around e-commerce is what is the right strategy for our e-store. So Patrick, would you share with us on the infrastructures that are important to get our e-commerce strategy right?
Yes, I'm very happy to do so. So if you are an online merchant, then well, obviously there are certain considerations that you're looking at in terms of your whole e-commerce platform strategy. I assume many of you are already e-commerce merchants, so probably you went through these steps already. Some of you might just be at the beginning of the journey, but either way you might look at either the initial implementation of the e-commerce strategy or maybe at a re-platforming at some stage. So these are probably the questions you would ask yourself as well. So in general, if we break down an e-commerce project throughout the journey, usually we have three big steps. Obviously, the planning stage where you actually look at your actual e-commerce strategy, the platform strategy, the whole implementation, what are actually the objectives you want to achieve, the actual build of the platform, obviously, and deployment and ongoing support. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus mostly on the planning stage. One reason is because if we go through all of these stages, obviously we would need a lot of time, but also because these are, I think, some of the important questions that we see as a e-commerce solution provider that merchants need to ask themselves in order to choose the right e-commerce strategy and the right platform strategy that fits their online business best. So let's go right into it. So this, as you can see here on the slide, are some of the most important questions that we see that business owners, that online merchants need to ask themselves, should ask themselves if they look at their implementation or their re-platforming of their online commerce platform. So just to start from the top, what are my general business objectives? What is my 3-year budget plan? What are the most important functional requirements I have for this platform? What are my expectations in regard to general traffic and order numbers? What is my geographical and target market strategy? And what is in general my omni-channel strategy? So I'm going to break down each of these questions a little bit further, so you can see how, first of all, these questions relate to your actual e-commerce strategy, and what the actual questions or the question breakdowns are that you should ask yourself for each of these points. So if you look at the first question, what are my business objectives over the coming 3 years? Obviously, first of all, you need to look at what should this platform actually provide? Are you, let's say, a more classic B2C merchant? Are you a B2B merchant? Are you maybe somewhere in the middle in terms of a B2B2C strategy? Or do you even have a mix of strategies? Maybe you do both B2C and B2B e-commerce. This is an important consideration in terms of choosing your platform. Same for what are the number of products you have or services that you offer on the platform? What are the number of SKUs? Are we talking about maybe just dozens? Are we talking about hundreds? Are we talking about millions of SKUs maybe? What is in general the structure, the size and workflow of your teams that are going to work with the platform? Is there a certain workflow where, for example, one team would create content, let's say, products, work specifically just on orders, and there's maybe another department that has to approve changes and has to approve any follow-up. And also, of course, a pretty important consideration for your e-commerce platform strategy is actually the budget that you might have available for both, and that's also important as well, for both the implementation stage, but also, of course, you need to look beyond that, especially if you look at licensing fees from platform providers. what are the costs over the next 3 to 5 years. So looking at the functional requirements, obviously there's a lot that can fall under that. At the end, that really depends on what kind of requirements are important for you. If you are a business owner, you might run an e-commerce business already, so probably aware, in this case, you're already very aware of what functional requirements you have. If not, maybe you are a merchant, maybe you run brick and mortar stores, or you sell to other sales channels, maybe through marketplaces. At the end, it's important, however, for you to define what functionality you need for your e-commerce platform that may come either out of the box in terms of the platform that you choose, or needs to be additionally developed. So some of the questions you should ask in this section are, for example, what type of products do I sell? Are these simple products, for example, where there's no configuration, where users cannot choose different attributes of an item? Are these maybe configurable products or bundle products, virtual products? So that, of course, relates very much also to the business that you run. If you have any specific promotion and marketing functionality, maybe you run some specific loyalty programs that you also want to utilize on this e-commerce platform. Do you have any specific maybe customer groups or customer segments also relating maybe to loyalty programs or VIP groups, or maybe wholesalers that have different terms and conditions and maybe different pricing strategies? And also, do you have any specific requirements in general to the content that you display on this e-commerce site in terms of your whole CMS strategy? Any specific multimedia items? Maybe you need a blog. Maybe you have some specific content types that you need to display on the platform. All very important questions to ask in terms of your functional requirements. Then, in terms of the traffic expectations and order numbers, of course, you would probably, again, if you are an online retailer already, right now you probably have an idea already what are the traffic numbers that you would expect over the next 1 to 3 to 5 years. If you're new to this, then probably you would look at comparable businesses or draw the numbers from other sources. But at least it's good if you have a general idea of what is going to be your traffic numbers and order numbers over the coming few years. So this can already flow into your planning in terms of your platform strategy, because it might have an impact in terms of the platform that you choose and the implementation strategy that you have. Next question, also very important in terms of your geographical and target market strategy. So obviously you are present in one country, maybe you're already selling in multiple countries, maybe even selling globally. But at the end, of course, what you need to ask yourself as well is, first of all, which countries do I actually sell to, and which countries maybe I just have a website for? Maybe I don't, because we see some merchants actually they have maybe just a catalog site for some countries and actual transactional site for other countries. You will need, of course, to look at all the implications that selling to a specific country would bring with it, in terms of maybe there's a certain additional language that you need to implement, maybe the additional currencies that you need to look at. You would need to review, you should look at your general warehouse strategy, at least if you're selling real products versus virtual products, of course. So where are your warehouse based? How do you actually deliver if an order comes in? What's your warehouse strategy in terms of geographical reach? Do you have different pricing strategies maybe for different countries? And also, what type of payments do you have for each of these countries, and what type of localizations you have? At the end, if you look at countries like, specifically like, for example, mainland China, like Japan, like Korea, obviously these are very specific countries in their in terms of their e-commerce, local e-commerce best practices, e-commerce regulations. So at the end, as a merchant, of course, you also need to make a decision in terms of how deep you want to go in terms of localizing to these markets and adapting to local best practices and adapting to local expectations. Well, finally, if you also take a more holistic view on your whole e-commerce strategy, of course, it's also important, and I mentioned it a few times before, you might already be a retailer with brick and mortar stores, you might already sell to other marketplaces. So at the end, of course, what you want to do at some point is probably looking at that comprehensively. How do you integrate actually your online sales channels? How do you integrate them with your backend systems that you might already run, like an ERP system, product information management system, order management system, etc.? Do you have any other marketing services or third-party services, maybe SaaS-based services that you want to implement, like email marketing services or specific learning systems, and also just down to really the technical capabilities maybe of your backend systems. What are they able to provide, and how will you be able to connect these the e-commerce solution, the e-commerce platform with your backend systems? Can you utilize APIs? Can you utilize web services? Do you need to work on a cloud-based code? So at the end, I mean, these are of course a lot of questions to ask yourself. The target here is really, of course, that first of all, you should have a pretty good idea of what the platform that you're going to choose at the end should provide. So you, as a merchant, for the initial implementation, of course, or the initial re-platforming, but also looking at the next 3 to 5 years in terms of your business and functional and technical requirements. And as you can see here on the slide, it's not completely accurate here. Of course, it would be a little bit difficult to actually assign numbers to your requirements and put it in a spider diagram as I've done here now. But the idea behind it is really that you're trying to match, obviously, the platform as much as possible to your existing business needs, or existing business and functional and technical requirements. And then on top of that, of course, you can consider that any platform you choose can still be adapted to some degree, so there will obviously never be a platform that fits exactly all your needs, but this is of course part of what we do. This is the core of our service basically as well, Bluecom, adapting the platform to your specific business needs.
Okay, so Patrick, when you talk about when you choose an e-commerce platform, there's no one solution fit all. So just wonder what platform and solution are those successful e-commerce companies usually adopting?
That's a good question, Jenty. At the end, my point is this. Obviously, there are a lot of platforms out there, and I mentioned in the very beginning, there are some specific platforms that we work with as a solution partner. But to be very honest, every platform, maybe let's say almost every platform has its reason to be there, because it can fulfill some specific requirements in terms of what a business user, what a business owner, what a merchant is looking for. For a consumer, of course, at the end, facing the other side of the channel and just facing the front end, they of course don't care at all usually what platform is behind that. For them, it's all about, can I actually do what I want to do with this online shop, and does it help me actually to achieve my target in terms of purchasing a product or do whatever I want to do on that platform?
That's a very good point. So as I know, for e-commerce in 2014 was a year of milestones. Worldwide, the sales hit a record high of 1.3 trillion. And also Alibaba claimed the title for the largest global IPO ever. This year is expected to be even better, with the global sales growing 6.4%. To support the growth, we'll see the e-commerce company focusing on improving the overall customer experience and also reducing the friction wherever possible to drive support and sales. So Patrick, would you share with us on your projection for the trends in the e-commerce space, especially on those technology platforms?
Yes, sure. So in general, there are a few trends we see specifically in the East Asia region, and I've picked out some of them in the following slides in no particular order. And again, these are just some of the trends we see, but these are certainly some of the important trends that merchants should look at. First of all, trend number one, and this of course applies only to some of the merchants that have actually have started with their legacy platform, but we see as a general shift actually a move towards more established platforms, like for example, here are two examples, Magento and Hybrid, which are obviously very popular in the region. There are of course also other platforms. But the general idea is this. I mean, if you look a few years back, and the ones of you who run, maybe we have a few SMBs who actually run legacy platforms, you might speak of experience here as well. When you look a few years back, there was not a big selection. There was actually almost no selection of really appropriate e-commerce platforms, e-commerce frameworks that we have right now that already provide most of the functionality that an actual online merchant needs, with the stability and flexibility that an e-commerce and online merchant needs to grow over the next few years. So in this case, of course, if we look a few years back, many merchants have resorted to building their own legacy platform, their own platform, not so much because they wanted to, but more out of necessity. But if we look at the current situation, we see this shift. Of course, not for every business. There are still businesses, let's say like hospitality, for example, or travel business, where maybe platforms are not so much available, but because they have very specific business requirements. But as a general assumption here, as a general assessment, if we look across B2C and B2B companies, we see the shift specifically for a few reasons, and I've mentioned some of the main reasons here on this slide. So first of all, I mean, actually we're working right now also with some merchants that are just changing right now from their legacy platform to some of these more common e-commerce platforms for one big reason, because of scalability. Because at some point, as a merchant, you build up this platform, you build it, you grow it, you extend it, you add more and more functionality to it. But at some point, of course, it's important to consider that this platform then just becomes very extensive. At some point, it might become very hard to control, actually, because you have this kind of a monster of a platform that has grown over the years. It might work well right now. Maybe there are a few flaws here and there, but it's getting more and more difficult actually to maintain the platform, because at the end, of course, as an online merchant, you're always under pressure to keep up with competition, to keep up with the market in general, right? So there's never a point where you can stop actually and just maintain your current legacy platform. There's always work you need to do to add functionality. So if you compare that to the common platforms like Hybrid, like Magento or others, there's of course a much bigger development community. There's a much bigger set of merchants that use the same platform. So of course, and then we have the platform providers themselves. They add a lot of functionality actually for these platforms. They look at the stability, they look at the flexibility, they look at the extendability of the platform on behalf of the merchants basically. Right? So this is basically from the platform provider, of course, ensuring that the merchant can grow with their solution and be on top of current development. And the other part to that is as well, not just from a functional and technical point of view, of course also from an organizational point of view. If we look at organizations, especially online merchants that have grown legacy platforms over the years, they usually have also grown their IT teams that maintain these platforms. So at the end, what you would also most likely end up is, first of all, a pretty big IT team. Even though you might be an online merchant, you might have a pretty big IT team, and from the outside you might look at like an IT company rather than an online merchant. But also at the end, of course, a lot of the knowledge about the platform boils down to some key employees who have been maybe with the company and with starting to developed this platform a few years ago. They've stayed on all the time, but they tend to, of course, then also wield a lot of power and be very critical to, in general, to an organization's success. As a second trend, and again, this is of course a very broad assessment here, as you can see, is a general trend, especially in East Asia, to integrate the standalone, the branded e-commerce site more and more into the general multi-channel, omni-channel strategy, and also utilizing other technologies, for example, in-store technology, to create, the target is really here to create a seamless experience for customers to actually purchase across channels, so they don't have to decide anymore very specifically which channel they have to choose. They can more and more seamlessly change between channels, between online and offline retail, between maybe different online marketplaces, and also, of course, from a business point of view, to get to know the customers better, from a business owner's point of view, getting to know the customers better, following customers better, and following their preferences better across channel, and not just have these pieces of information from different channels. So as a very, and you can see here, this is a very, very simplified graph, but the idea is really having this in the middle, this single source of truth, which can be your ERP system or general the management system for orders, for the warehouse, and especially for customer information. But basically, you would have all the information that's going in from your different online sales channels, online or offline sales channels, going through this or into this system basically that feeds other channels, and this is where you basically feed from your loyalty programs from, your marketing tools from. So just to make sure you have a coherent strategy across all sales channels, you don't have different teams that maybe propagate different brand values, different brand images across different sales channels, and from a technical point of view, of course, that means as well, and this again is also part of what we do, integrating the e-commerce channel with the backend system. I mentioned that also as a second point, and this is at this point still a little bit more of a future trend, not so much what we see right now, but for sure it's actually very exciting already, because these are technologies that in part are already existing, but I think what we're waiting here right now is first of all, of course, more for the implementation within businesses, but also the acceptance of customers, of course, which is also a very important consideration for new technologies to be successful. So that can relate here to in-store technologies, for example, like for apparel merchants, for example, there's a lot of technology that's available, that's up and coming, like digital try-ons, customers being able to try on a product maybe virtually, maybe in the shop, maybe at home. Products customers don't need to line up anymore, don't need to queue up anymore at POS. They can have the product delivered directly to home. So a lot of cross-channel opportunities here. As a third trend, certainly mobile commerce is, it's in some regards not even so much of a trend anymore. It has become kind of a standard already in terms of, first of all, mobile design integration, obviously something that we are, for example, also now doing for all of our customers in terms of looking at the desktop side, of course, but also at the same time looking at the mobile strategy in terms of the responsive design or the mobile template. On top of that, what merchants also might consider is a specific native app on the most important platform, just to be able to use additional features that the mobile phone provides. Of course, there's still a lot more that can be done, what current merchants are maybe not using to the full extent yet in terms of location-based services, in terms of mobile payments, in terms of in-store marketing, etc. Still a lot of opportunities. But again, part of that really depends on the technical implication and on the side of the business owner, but part of that, of course, also depends on the acceptance of customers. Lastly, as a, again, very general trend in terms of general hosting considerations, cloud hosting considerations, we're going to hear a little bit more about that later from Gene in his presentation, but we see, of course, the shift very much towards very scalable hosting solutions, specifically cloud hosting solutions that enable merchants to, on the one hand, use resources very efficiently, in terms of their whole infrastructure and hosting strategy, but also on the other hand, be very prepared for these peaks in traffic that occur if you run a specific promotion strategy, marketing strategy, or a specific holiday, for example, like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, etc.
Okay, cool. So Patrick, when you talk about the trend, actually it covers quite a lot of new technology, which is we adopt. But I'm just wondering, is there any, when you talk about the changing customer demand, because nowadays there's quite a lot of new things, new products, so probably the requirement of those customers is changing as well. So is the requirement that impact on the technology used in the sector also drive any innovation as well?
Well, of course, I mean, innovation at the end always comes from customer demand, right? So at the end, of course, only the technology is going to be successful that's either asked for by customers or that's going to be accepted to some degree. But like I say, at the end, for the customers itself, of course, from a technical point of view, it doesn't matter so much what's behind it. But what the customer, of course, wants at the end is the most convenient and the always availability of the platform. So in that regard, if we look at all the technical considerations, etc., these, of course, are all just facilitators for business owners to, first of all, adapt to customers' expectations. The customer expectations are growing for sure, and people are getting more individual for sure. So this is a very important consideration. But also, of course, if we look at the wider market, to keep up with the competition in general.
Okay, thanks for your advice. I think everyone agrees that selecting an e-commerce platform is a critical decision. It will form the backbone of our online channel and as one of the biggest investments alongside with our infrastructure. So speaking about infrastructure, Gene, can you share with us your experience on architecting, implementing, and optimizing the IT infrastructure for e-commerce?
Sure, absolutely, Kathy. So Kathy did a really amazing job. Really amazing job talking about the questions you need to ask when you go about choosing your e-commerce platform. And you need to balance those naturally against the business needs. Now, when it comes to choosing infrastructure, there are just as many questions. So what I tend to find is that when I ask these questions, everybody actually has the same answers as well as expectations. Now, on the slide, I've actually shown some of the answers and expectations that I hear. My site must be up 24/7, 365. It must be able to cope with any number of users at any point of the day. It naturally has to be secure and compliant to any rules and regulations. Of course, it has to be cost effective. And for some, they need help managing. And I hope that some of these comments actually resonate with today's audience. So these answers and expectations actually neatly summarize what I consider to be the key considerations associated with designing and building an infrastructure for your e-commerce platform. And those considerations are your availability, scalability and performance, security and compliance, management, as well as cost. Now, going into those considerations, availability really refers to how much downtime can you as a business experience before it becomes an unacceptable business risk. Now, for most, this is a very silly question. After all, you can't experience any downtime since your business is running on that platform. So what I'm about to tell you that it will cost you about 100% more to go from, say, 95% availability to 99% availability, or potentially 500% more to go from 99% availability to 99.95% availability. How does it affect your decision? So the availability consideration is all about the classic risk versus cost.
How much can my business invest into infrastructure in order to prevent downtime? Now, you naturally don't want to invest too much, such that it takes away from your bottom line. But at the same time, you don't want to invest too little, such that when you do experience downtime, and everybody does, then it takes hours or days to recover, costing you lots in terms of revenue as well as reputation. Now, scalability refers to the ability of your infrastructure to meet the demands of your user load at any point in time. And that could be on the back of a sudden marketing push, where you see a sudden spiky load, or through the gradual increase in user load as your business expands. Now, the scalability consideration is again a cost versus risk question. How much do you want to invest in your infrastructure and technical expertise to ensure that you can meet the demands of users? Of course, you don't want to invest too much, such that you have unused and wasted capacity, and you don't want to invest too little, such that you can't meet demand. Now, the third consideration is security and compliance. Now, both these topics are extremely complex, and we could spend days talking about them. The key thing to understand, though, is that when it comes to security and compliance, you need to understand your regulatory obligations. And usually in the context of e-commerce, this means your PCI obligations. If you're not bound by regulations, though, you still need to consider how important security is for your organization. You need to consider security to protect your reputation and operations, as well as your customers. And again, this is another risk versus cost question. Now, the fourth consideration is around management, or in other words, the people cost. Now, when running an e-commerce store, you're going to need people to manage the environment, whether that be managing the day-to-day operations of the store, managing the e-commerce platform itself, or managing the infrastructure. Now, you can employ people internally, you could outsource, or you could use a combination. But the key thing here is that you need to think about what is the best fit for your organization and its business goals. If you are a very technical organization, for example, then naturally you're going to invest in more people with specialized expertise. On the other hand, if you are a business that's going to use technology as a differentiator, then you'd probably prefer to invest less in that technical expertise. Now, all these considerations culminate to the final consideration of cost. Now, you'll notice that for all the considerations I mentioned, I actually regularly reference the risk versus cost versus benefit equation. And that's the key message I want to get across when talking about these considerations, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all infrastructure. Designing infrastructure is all about balancing the risk versus the cost versus the benefit against your business objectives. Now, as a business owner, you want the best availability, you want the best scalability, security, and management. But as with other things in your business, you'd also expect a relative increase in cost for those things. Similarly, if your goal is all about cost reduction, then you're going to need to adjust your expectations around these considerations. One thing to bear in mind, though, is that as your business evolves, your infrastructure must also evolve as well. So you need to constantly measure and adjust these considerations against your changing business objectives. So I do hope that that's given you some idea of the considerations that you must think about when you're designing or running your e-commerce infrastructure.
Okay, Jim, so when you talk about those fundamental things, what aspects are often overlooked or prove to be the most challenging ones?
Sure, so in my experience, I tend to find that it's the cost element, the last consideration that I talked about here, that people tend to overlook. Everybody, as I mentioned, wants the best, but they don't factor in that cost is going to increase relatively. So it's important to recognize that when choosing these factors, cost is an important element that you need to factor into your choice of infrastructure.
Okay, so it's good point. So Patrick, what do you think about it? Or do you have any thoughts about the common mistake about the e-commerce company are usually making?
Well, if we look at what we would see as mistakes anyway that e-commerce companies are making, I think very roughly they can be summarized into two separate groups. It's either organizational or it's technical. Right? So organizational mistakes that companies, for example, make, and what we see more or less common is, for example, first of all, of course, you cannot expect that once you go through this whole process that we showed before, the planning, the building, the deployment of the platform, then that's all there, and basically you can just let it run its course. I mean, if you're of course engaged and you want to be a successful online merchant, of course, and as we've mentioned several times throughout this presentation, there's a lot of market changes as well. It's a very dynamic market environment, of course, so there's always going to be some stuff to do in terms of improving your platform, in terms of adding additional functionality, making the whole shopping experience more convenient for your user. And that, of course, also really requires the necessary the planning, the necessary budget, but also the necessary support really from the general management, right? And here I'm referring more to, for example, bigger companies. We know some of the bigger companies, especially the ones that were maybe very successful in brick and mortar retail, and maybe not so successfully and not so quickly adapted to online strategies because maybe the initial support of the top management was not there. For sure, this is changing very quickly, also just out of necessity, of course, because there's no way around e-commerce anymore. But these are for sure some of the mistakes we've seen on an organizational level. On a technical level, well, of course, a lot of mistakes can also be made. A lot of these, I guess you can refer to also to some of the questions I raised previously for the planning stage. Obviously, some of the questions are maybe not answered the right way, or maybe not reviewed as in the first place. Maybe some of the strategies that should be implemented are not implemented yet. I'm referring here specifically maybe to mobile strategies, for example, omni-channel strategies, just something that we see has become very relevant, very important, and maybe at this point, maybe it doesn't prevent sales on your platform. Maybe it still allows people, of course, to purchase products on your platform, to check out, but maybe you don't reach what you could reach actually with your platform.
Okay, so Jean, you've presented a number of considerations that companies need to think about to maintain a good store. So how do they address those considerations? Maybe starting with how can they improve their availability?
Sure. So availability is actually very simple to improve. We'd like to improve availability through redundancy, or in other words, having backup systems. Now, as you can imagine, though, the more redundancies you have, the greater investment you need to make. Now, depending on your appetite for risk, redundancies can be introduced at many different levels. If you want to protect against something as simple as a local disk failure, you need a redundant disk. If you want to protect against server failure, then you're going to need to introduce, for example, a backup or a standby server. And if you want to protect something, for example, a media strike against your data center, then naturally you're going to need a disaster recovery site. Now, to give you an example of the extent a company will take to improve availability, I just quickly want to talk about a Rackspace customer, Oakley, the sports as well as sunglasses and sports apparel company. Now, Oakley considers availability as their number one priority, bar none, when they came to us. And this makes sense given how many sales they could lose and how their brand could be tarnished due to an outage. So we designed in redundancies at all levels, from the server to the data center, to all but guarantee their uptime. And that meant that last year they only experienced 30 minutes of downtime, all of which was completely unrelated to the infrastructure. Now that gives them a 99.995% uptime, which is a similar uptime expected for hospitals where access to the computer system can mean life or death. Now, taking a tangent away from the original question, I quickly do want to introduce you to some availability metrics in the hope to give everyone on the webcast today a little bit more value, particularly in your availability conversations with your vendors. Now, there's three well-known metrics associated with availability. Firstly, the recovery time objective, which refers to the amount of downtime you can experience before it becomes an unsettled business risk. A 30-minute RTO means I can have a maximum of 30 minutes of downtime at any one point in time. Or in other words, I'm willing to lose up to 30 minutes of sales at most. Recovery point objective refers to the amount of data you can lose before it becomes an unacceptable business risk. So a 30-minute RTO means I can lose 30 minutes of data before it becomes unacceptable, and that's in one downtime session. Now, of these two metrics, I tend to find that RTO is more relevant to e-commerce stores since it affects sales directly, whereas RTO is more relevant for data-driven companies. Additionally, it is worth noting that for both metrics, as this number decreases, you tend to find that the costs increase exponentially. Now, the last metric is uptime percentage, and that comes in the form of, for example, a 99.9% uptime for your infrastructure, usually measured over a year. Now, personally, I consider this metric not to be as valuable as the previous two, because it doesn't actually take into account the actual downtime experience. If I, for example, have a 99.9% uptime SLA, it means I can have 8 hours of downtime every year. Now, if that 8 hours does come in a single big outage, then it's still within the SLA. But it could actually mean the difference between my business staying open or closing. Now, contrast this with the RTO, which defines a metric for one outage, of which was the maximum amount of time before I must be up again. And after looking at this, you tend to see the value of that RTO metric. So when you are talking to a vendor, it is important to talk with these metrics, particularly your RTO and your RTO, since this will lead to a more constructive conversation about availability.
Yeah, right. So when you talk about availability, I just think about I read an article. It's talking about if the website is loading more than 3 seconds, probably the user they will let the website. So that's why I would like to ask, what about ensuring they support the high level of traffic at the peak time? Do you have any tips or tricks to share with our audience?
Sure, and what you refer to there, Nancy, is actually associated with scalability. Now, going into scalability a little bit, scalability again is all about meeting user load. Now, there's two really well-known scaling strategies when it comes to scaling your environment. The first scaling strategy is scaling up, where we simply add more resources to our existing hardware. So we have more resources to work with, so this may be more memory, more disk, more CPU. Now you tend to find this is a cost-effective method for scaling, since you don't need to buy any further infrastructure. But scaling up does come with diminishing returns, where we can support users up to a certain point before new bottlenecks are introduced into the environment and we can't scale up any further. And those bottlenecks could be, for example, the network. So really the second scaling strategy, scaling out, is often the recommended way of scaling in this day and age. Now, scaling out refers to adding more machines to handle load. And it's recommended because it gives a more linear growth in terms of the number of users it can support. So one machine can support 100 users, then typically 5 machines can support 500. But there is one important factor when considering the scaling out strategy, and that factor is that scale out is tied to the capabilities of the underlying e-commerce platform. If the underlying platform is incapable of scaling out, then you cannot use this mechanism for scaling. And this really re-emphasizes what Patrick has said about the importance of choosing the right e-commerce platform. Now, the last aspect of scaling I want to talk about is elasticity or auto-scaling. Now, this is a very recent concept and is very much an extension to the scale-up strategy. Now, auto-scaling uses the on-demand nature of cloud to automatically create more servers when it detects a high user load, and automatically remove servers when it detects that the user load is low. Now, this is ideal since it means that your site will always have just enough capacity to meet demand, but at the same time it reduces costs when the demand isn't there. Of course, everything does come with a but, and despite what the marketers say, auto-scaling is very technically demanding and does require a high level of automation as well as administrative skill in order to make it work successfully. So, although it does create an ideal scaling environment, it does increase that people and potentially licensing costs as well.
So, Dean, do you have any example of what this is used for scalability?
Absolutely. So Domino's Pizza, as everyone probably knows, the number one pizza delivery company, particularly in the UK. Domino's e-commerce platform has a really well-known scale-up mechanism. Now, Domino's utilizes Rackspace's VMware virtualization platform as well as Rackspace's public cloud for their infrastructure. The Rackspace public cloud really gives them that on-demand scale-out agility, while the VMware platform, which is actually more cost-effective, actually supports these stable workloads. So, in a major event, such as a sports event, they can burst into the public cloud to meet capacity, but at the same time scale back after sale or after that event to reduce the cost. So this is an example of how businesses using the scale-out strategy as well as the right technology can benefit them as well as their customers.
Okay, so after we talk about availability and scalability, I know PCI compliance is also a major consideration for e-commerce. Firstly, can you talk about what PCI compliance is, and secondly, what does it apply to?
Absolutely. So PCI really stands for Payment Card Industry. When we talk about PCI in the infrastructure space, we actually refer to PCI DSS, or Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. Now, PCI DSS is actually a set of technical security standards created and maintained by the PCI Council, which itself is formed of members from the major credit card brands, JCB, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and so on. And these companies have a vested interest in protecting their brand as well as their customers. Now, the goal of PCI DSS is to set a standard around security for a merchant's IT environment so they can safely support the use of credit and debit cards. Now, the standard is here shown on the slide. It consists of 12 significant requirements. Now, I'm not going to go through these individually as there is way too much information here, but of these 12 requirements, there are multiple sub-requirements covering aspects ranging from physical security through to proper process and control. Now, to achieve certification, it's up to the merchant to prove they can successfully meet each and every one of those standards. The strictness of meeting those standards largely depends on the PCI level of the merchant though. Now, shown in the slide, there are 4 PCI levels ranging from 1 to 4. And each level is determined by the number of transactions you will do a year, with level 1 being the highest. Now, as you can imagine, if you are the highest level, you will have the highest level of strictness, and this is true. As a level 1 merchant, there's a requirement that you employ an independent external auditor known as a QSA or a qualified security system to verify your compliance. On the other hand, as a level 2 to 4, there's only a need to complete an FAQ or a self-assessment questionnaire to assess your own compliance. But at this stage, probably the most pertinent question you have from me at the moment is, do I need to be PCI compliant? Now, according to the PCI Council's website, PCI applies to all organizations or merchants that process, store, or transmit any cardholder data. Said another way, if a customer of an organization ever pays the merchant directly using a credit or debit card, then PCI DSS requirements apply. Now, I emphasize the word directly, since it is possible to avoid PCI obligations if you receive payment indirectly. Now, a third-party payment gateway like PayPal or WorldPay can be used by e-commerce stores, so the responsibility, complexity, and cost of PCI fall onto those providers. So I do want to highlight that even if you are using a payment gateway, there may be still PCI obligations that you must adhere to, so just to check with your provider about them.
Okay, cool. So after we're talking about those considerations to maintain a good e-store, I'm just wondering, when a company launch a new site or we platform the existing website for the expansion, what are the major infrastructure challenges they see, or even like how can Rackspace help?
So the challenges I see for most e-commerce businesses is they often have trouble turning their requirements, particularly concerning the considerations we talked about today, into a technical infrastructure that meets those requirements. Additionally, e-commerce businesses regularly lack ongoing specific support and guidance as their business grows. Now, many vendors do a really great job of getting you on board, but once you're on board, you're on your own. And to be fair, for many e-commerce businesses, this is exactly what they want, since they would balance the lower cost of infrastructure for higher management costs. But for businesses looking for ongoing support, or looking to offload some of their IT support functions so they can focus on their core business, this is where Rackspace can help. So we host thousands of e-commerce sites based across many e-commerce platforms. And many of these sites are designed to be highly available and scalable to meet demands of things like Black Friday or Boxing Day. And as a PCI Level 1 service provider, we also have a lot of experience hosting PCI compliant sites. Now, we've concentrated that experience and knowledge as expertise into an e-commerce team who gives you custom and platform-specific infrastructure advice and support, from designing the infrastructure from the get-go through to the ongoing day-to-day management. And as a customer of Rackspace, this is included as part of your standard service, and we don't ever limit your access to that team. Now, to give you an example of our platform-specific capabilities, we're a platinum hosting partner for Magento and also the largest Magento hoster in the world. And we've largely achieved this title by providing our customers with that ongoing Magento-specific infrastructure support to help them grow. And that also allows them to focus on their core business as opposed to infrastructure. Now, take, for example, a local Hong Kong company, eHobby, that specializes in the game of airsoft. eHobby have chosen Magento as their e-commerce platform, and while being with Rackspace, they've been able to grow 20 to 30%, while also reducing infrastructure costs compared to their previous platform. And they've done this by working closely with our support and our Magento team, who have helped to optimize and improve their platform. And a lot of those abilities also spread to other platforms such as Hybris as well as Oracle ATG. So if you are a business that is looking for a great level of management around an e-commerce platform, or you're also looking to offload your infrastructure support so you can focus on your core business, then Rackspace may be a really great fit for you.
Thank you. So Patrick and Jim talk a lot about the trend, or even like how do we choose the infrastructures and platform. So I would like to summarize the whole webinar by asking a question to both of you. How can e-commerce company achieve success in today's market? Maybe Patrick, would you share your thoughts with us first?
Well, look, I mean, there's of course never a guarantee for success. I guess that's true for every business. But here's the thing, and I think that's also the main breakdown of today's webinar. We want to see, of course, from our perspective, that at least from a technical perspective, a merchant is able to reach their full potential, there is nothing holding them back, right? And that's why in the initial section of this webinar, we raised all these questions that merchants, that business owners should ask themselves in terms of their planning, in terms of their platform strategy. So at least to make sure from a technical perspective, from a platform perspective, everything is in order to reach the potential to build the best platform that a merchant can build according to his or her business. And then on top of that, of course, there's, to be honest, of course, and every e-commerce online merchant knows that there's a lot more related to that, a lot more that you need to consider as a business owner. But at least if you get all the fundamentals right, that will help you a lot to grow your business and be very active with your online e-commerce site.
Yeah, and as Patrick has said, there's never any guaranteed success. But from an infrastructure perspective, again, taking into consideration that I've talked about balancing it against your costs as well as your business objectives will give your infrastructure the greatest flexibility and the greatest experience for your end customers. So really that is the way to achieve success from an infrastructure standpoint, and that is largely making sure that the foundation for which the e-commerce platform is based on meets the requirements of the business as well as your customers.
That's a really good point. So I'm just wondering if there are any questions from the audience. You can put your questions in the chat box. Okay, so we didn't see any questions from the chat box, but I got a question from the registration before. So so it's about how do we help, no matter the platform or the infrastructure, can help those Chinese cross-border e-commerce companies move into the new market. So just wondering, Jean or Patrick, do you have any comment on that?
Sure. So Rackspace actually works with a number of different companies that have been based in China and want to grow globally. I've got a good example with smartbuyGlasses.com. They were based originally in China and they wanted to grow globally. They wanted to attack the Europe, the US, and even the Australasian market. And what Rackspace provides is that platform experience and knowledge. And we also have actually those 10 global data centers around the world. And we've actually helped smartbuyGlasses actually double their sales since they've been with us by giving them a foothold into those different regions, like having a data center in all their chosen regions. So they actually have region-specific sites for Australia, where we have a data center, as well as the US and UK, again, where we have a lot of data centers in those regions as well.
Yeah, let me just add to that, of course, from Bluecom perspective, and as such, as we're working very closely with Rackspace also with merchants that look at their cross-border operations. Obviously, the piece that we can bring in is the actual localization of the e-commerce platform, making sure that merchants can adapt to actually the target market. We implement with all the local technologies, local integrations, and integrate with any back-end solutions that help them to facilitate their cross-border business.
Cool. Cool. It's come to the end of the webinar. I would like to say thanks again for joining our webinar, and we hope you enjoyed the section. And we also hope to see you again in our upcoming event. Thank you.